That's about the darkest moment a man can be in. Here I was, hysterical 7-year-old in the back seat that I can't get to. I'm pinned, I'm losing consciousness. I know half the family's gone, and I was driving the car. Um, the guilt, the regret, and I don't share that to be morbid or graphic. It's just that's the state when this near death experience began. And in all that turmoil, light came. Light, like light came and surrounded me, tangible light. It was comforting. It was almost holding me in this horrible despair, and it felt as if I began to rise above the scene of the accident, and suddenly I there was no pain. Suddenly I was incredibly conscious. I could breathe. I didn't hurt, and I even thought, "How can this be? How can I possibly be okay?" And then in all that light, Tamara, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, she was there with me, but she was very much alive, gorgeous, vibrant, but hysterical about the fact that I had to go back. She kept saying, "You can't stay, you can't stay, you can't be here. You've gotta go back." And we had a conversation about if I stayed with her, Spencer would be orphaned, and we made the choice that I was coming back. I had to come back and raise our son. Now, somehow in that scenario, she knew she couldn't come back, and, there was and I hate to even bring it up. There was head trauma that took her life, and I was aware of that at the scene, but there was no trauma in this scenario. She was perfect and whole, but she's like, "You've gotta go back," and we made the choice, and I chose to come back. Now, it was interesting in doing that. We have no idea how powerful our thoughts are. I didn't have to think about, "Well, how do I get back?" It was the intention, I'm going back, and it's almost like I was just whoosh, just like whisked, and then I found myself just wandering about, moving about a busy level 1 hospital, level 1 trauma center. It was instant. I mean, what I later found out is I had to be extricated from the car because of my injuries. I had to be airlifted or life flighted to, the closest level 1 trauma center. I was unaware of any of that. All I knew is I'd crashed the car. I'd said this profound goodbye. It felt as if I was just whooshed, to this hospital, and here I was moving around. When I say I, though, it was like my soul. I was moving about the hospital, the doctors, the nurses, the patients, the families of patients. I was aware, almost 360 degrees aware of everything around me. Um, and when I say aware, wow, like everybody I saw, I felt them. I knew them. I knew their love. I knew their hate. I knew their pain, their motivations, their joys, their sorrows. I knew them as well as I knew myself, and I felt this overwhelming connection. I now call it a oneness. I was connected. I knew them. Quick example, a nurse passed me, completely unaware of me, but I felt in that moment abuse. I felt the abuse she had experienced as a child. And yet in the same instant, it's like, wow, but look at her. Look at her here serving, healing, helping, being. And it was that way of everyone I encountered. It's like I knew them. I knew everything about them, but I saw them in this magnificent state, this divine state, until I finally came up to a body laying on the gurney that I didn't feel anything from, which was odd given this connected experience I was having. So I stepped closer to look, and that's when I realized, "Oh my goodness, that's me. That's me." But it wasn't me. I was this soul, if you will, having this profound oneness scenario, and yet there was my body. There was the skin suit that I'd been navigating life in. And it was the it there was this profound sadness, and yet also this realization, this respect for the body. I mean, mine was so broken, that was the sadness. Wow, look at the broken body, And there was a awareness of, wow, I never realized what an incredible machine my body was. I don't have to remind my heart to beat. I don't have to think about my lungs, breathing. I don't have to teach my eyes to see or my feet how to run. I mean, I saw this miracle the body is, and mine was so broken, and I knew I had to get back in it. And once again, I didn't have to figure out how to get back in. It was the conscious thought. As soon as the intention, I'm going back in, boom, then I was back into the body, before narcotics could be administered. And then at the end of my hospital stay, when I'm off of the morphine and, all the drugs that go with those type of injuries, and I'm just in the rehabilitation wing. But this light, just like at the accident, felt tangible. It felt like it was comforting me. I began to rise above the hospital bed, but this time the light dispensed. It went away, and I was in this most beautiful place. People can say heaven, the spirit world, the other side. The only word that comes close to what I was feeling is I was home. I was home, and I began to run. I was whole. I had both legs. I had a healthy body. I say. I mean, I suppose my soul was out of my body, but it felt so physical. Like I could feel the energy of the ground under my feet. I could feel the intelligence in my calves and thighs, and I was joyfully running, thinking I'm whole and I'm home. And then I got this knowing that I wasn't there to stay. And there was this corridor off to the left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go that way. So I began working my way down this corridor. And as I did, I could see at the end of the corridor was a crib. And Griffin, my son, at 14 months, he had still been sleeping in a crib at the time of the accident, and so I rushed to this crib. And I looked in the crib, and there was my little boy, sleeping as beautifully and as perfectly as when I glanced in that rearview mirror. I mean, the details, his eyelashes, and I swept him up in my arms, and it was so tangible. It felt so I don't know if you've ever picked up a sleeping child. I mean, there's a weight and there's a heat, and I was feeling all of that, and I held him against me, and he was solid, and I could feel him breathing against my neck, and the senses were so alive. I leaned over and I smelled his hair. I used to do that when I was putting him to bed or what. I mean, I'd smell his hair, and I thought, "This is my boy." And I began crying, holding him, so grateful that he was okay, and I was having this experience. But as I did this, there was this presence behind me, this overwhelming, cosmic, powerful presence. And I grew up in a conservative Christian home, and I'm thinking, well, that's God. That's God. And I'm holding my little boy, and this presence is coming closer, and I begin to have guilt come up in me, thinking my little boy's here because I crashed the car. I mean, his life was cut short because I overcorrected or lost control, and this presence is coming closer and closer, and the guilt is bubbling up, and the presence is right there. And I had this thought. I thought, I hope I can be forgiven. And in that thought is where the whole thing just, it's like the lid came off. I mean, and this almost felt tangible. These divine arms wrapped around and held me and my little boy. And it's almost like we just became connected in such a, like, oneness again. Like I was that and that was me, and my little boy's right here. And then there was this download. In my thought, I hope I can be forgiven. The thought came, there's nothing to forgive. Everything is in divine order. And of course, I'm in so much sorrow and grief, and yet then I saw my life. I've learned it's called the life review, but my life flashed before my eyes, but I'm seeing it, and I'm seeing it almost from, like, God's perspective. Like, I'm saying, "Well, that was a mistake, and I didn't mean to do that," and yet this communication in the arms of this divine being was But what did you learn? What did you learn from that? What was the lesson? Not the guilt or the, like, what was the lesson? And I saw things and I thought, "Well, that was wrong," and I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. And God, if you will, the being that held me said, "Well, that's your judgment of it, not mine. You are so loved. You're as loved as the little boy you hold. You're as perfect and precious and beloved and begotten as he is." And it was multiplied because here I was holding my son, to me, who was perfect and was all that, and yet it was multiplied, and I'm in the arms of the divine, and it was a very personal experience, but I knew that it was true of every living soul. I mean, it's like the whole universe was watching this, and that love rippled out to everything and everyone, and one of the interesting things is God said to me, I'm using that word, there's so many names, the divine, it was communicated to me that I was to exercise my will. And I'm thinking, well, here I am in the arms of God, and given my upbringing, oh no, it's your will be done. How can that possibly be? I can't exercise my will. And it was communicated, no, you exercise your will. That's how much we love you. My will has always been that you have free will, that you get to choose. God's will is that I have free will. And this communication's going on, and it wasn't necessarily words, it was just communication, downloads. And I was told, "You can be mad at God your whole life because this, accident was allowed to happen and half your family passed, and we love you anyway, that's acceptable," you know? I was told I could beat myself up my whole life because I was driving the car, and that was a choice. But I was given the 3rd choice that I could give my son. I could hand him over. I could pass him over in trust, and that way, it wouldn't feel like he's yanked from me. I would be exercising my will and giving him to God. And in all that love and all that beauty and all that peace and all that joy, you know, the grief was gone. I was able to kiss my little boy and hand him over and trust and and know that he was okay. And in doing that, then I woke up in the hospital bed.